Good evening. Welcome to the Critical Hour. We're coming to you from the capital of the United States of America, Washington, D.C., here on Radio Sputnik. I'm your host, political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist, Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I'm joined here by my co-host, political analyst, Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
For the next 2 hours, we will explore and analyze the salient news stories that are impacting the global village in which we live. Donald Rumsfeld, the former U.S. congressman, aide to several Republican presidents, and two-time defense secretary, died Tuesday at the age of 88. We usually don't discuss stories like this, but in our opinion, he had such a devastating impact on the world, we just needed to spend a few minutes talking about this guy. So for insight into this and other issues, let's do what we always do on Friday. Let's turn to our first guest. He's a widely acclaimed speaker, writer, journalist, and political analyst. He has traveled extensively in the Middle East and Latin America. He is a source for a number of news outlets. Caleb Maupin. Caleb, as always, welcome back.
Sure. Glad to be here.
And your new book has just reached number one in the anarchist category on Amazon, correct?
That is correct. It is the number one new release in the category of Amazon. It's Bread Tube Serves Imperialism, examining the new brand of internet pseudo-socialism. I go after some of the big internet leftist personalities who are also very pro-imperialist and advocates of U.S. interventionism around the world. So, yeah, it's doing quite well. I'm quite happy about that.
Congratulations on that, Caleb. Donald Rumsfeld, he served as CEO or chairman of companies including General Instrument and Gilead Sciences, recruited an inner circle of former corporate executives to oversee Pentagon operations. He truly understood and exploited the power and dynamics of the military-industrial complex.
Oh, absolutely. And it's also interesting to note that probably the key moment for him, as well as for Dick Cheney and a number of people who emerged and eventually went on to, work with Reagan and then were in the Bush White House and the Bush administration, was the impeachment of Richard Nixon. When Gerald Ford came in and the Nixon administration, Nixon stepped down after the Watergate scandal, you had a real shift in conservative politics. And that's where a lot of the neocons ascended. That's where Alan Greenspan came from as well. Alan Greenspan, his first government job was with Gerald Ford. And Gerald Ford brought him in and brought Ayn Rand, the novelist, to the White House. And yes, Rumsfeld, that impeachment of Nixon was a moment where there was kind of a protectionist conservative edge to Richard Nixon. And when Nixon was removed, that was kind of the full ascendancy of the neocons in the Republican Party. And I think that's particularly interesting. But no one can forget the utter hypocrisy of, Donald Rumsfeld shaking hands with Saddam Hussein and Donald Rumsfeld then making the case for overthrowing Saddam Hussein. Those two facts, that one picture and that reality. The United States loves Saddam Hussein. The United States overthrows Saddam Hussein. That is probably what will stick with people the most about this particular individual, I would say.
But really quickly, to that point and to that picture, we can't overlook the fact at exactly what it was that Saddam and Rumsfeld were engaged in, because Rumsfeld was Ronald Reagan's missionary, or his man. I'm drawing a blank on the term I want to use. And the United States was selling Saddam Hussein the biological chemicals and the biological weapons that Saddam Hussein would then turn around and use against his enemies. So as the United States was promoting the idea of weapons of mass destruction and Saddam Hussein has all of these materials, there was a point in time when that was true because we were the ones that sold them to him. And I don't think that point should ever be overlooked.
Oh, absolutely. And who can forget that epic moment where he was confronted, Donald Rumsfeld was confronted by folks from Code Pink, and the former CIA whistleblower. His name is escaping me at the moment, and they confronted him and they said, you lied about weapons of mass destruction. And he says, "Oh, I didn't lie. When some of our soldiers were wearing chemical suits when they went to Iraq. And then they pointed out, of course they were, because you told them they were weapons of mass destruction. That's a non sequitur. And he had really no response to that at that point. His arguments had just kind of fallen flat. Yes, who can forget?
Moving on to another subject, China says we won't stop supporting the Venezuelan people and rejecting foreign influence. We're seeing, I've been reading lately that Russia is saying they're going to do some building some ports in Syria, regardless of whether the U.S. likes it or not. And we're seeing some of this anti-imperialist bloc getting more bold. And, the larger countries, I see why the U.S. is angry at Russia and China, because they're working with anti-imperialist countries and they're working with countries that we're trying to overthrow. Your thoughts on all of that?
Well, earlier this week, I had a conversation with a very important American lawyer, Nancy Hollander, and she was the lawyer for Chelsea Manning, and she's representing Guantanamo detainees. And she spoke with me about the case of Alex Saab, who is a Venezuelan diplomat who was flying to Iran to get medicine to deal with the COVID pandemic, and his plane refueled in Cape Verde. And then he was taken off the plane, and he's been held, and they're trying to extradite him from Cape Verde to the United States on charges of money laundering and violating U.S. sanctions against Venezuela. But he's a diplomat. He should have diplomatic immunity. He was on a diplomatic mission. On top of that, U.S. law regarding sanctions does not apply to other countries, right? You can pass U.S. laws about what Americans can do and what transactions Americans can take, but if Venezuela wants to buy medicine from Iran or vice versa, the USA has no jurisdiction there. It's a very disturbing case, and the United States really doesn't quite know what to do. The United States doesn't seem to be in a situation where they can have full-on invasions because Russia and China and their allies have enough military power that would open the door to World War III. So now it seems we have this tactic of grabbing random individuals and kind of holding them hostage. We have Meng, the CFO of Huawei in Canada, and now we have Alex Saab, the Venezuelan diplomat who's been held. So this is kind of the situation we're seeing where the United States is trying to figure out, okay, what cards can we play now, because our abilities are now limited due to the rise of Russia and China.
We didn't discuss this on the front end, but you're laying that out and mentioning those individuals takes us to the discussion about the difference between the rules-based order and international law. Because what you're laying out, they've done nothing to violate international law. But if you ask Joe Biden, well, they're violating the rules-based order.
Yes, and that's the talking point. I mean, the rules-based order is whatever the United States says it is, and if people go against it, they're violating the rules-based order. So yet the UN has condemned the U.S. blockade of Cuba for how many times? Just condemned it once again. And the United States continues it. That doesn't seem to be a violation of the rules-based order, according to Joe Biden. Furthermore, we have a situation where the United States continues to give military aid to Israel, even though they know that Israel has nuclear weapons and is not a signatory of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. That makes the United States in complete violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. If the USA is giving aid to a country that has nuclear weapons and has not signed the treaty, they are that is a blatant violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So if anything, the United States should be facing sanctions from all over the world for their aid to Israel. But of course, that doesn't happen. This rules-based world order stuff, this rules-based global order rhetoric seems to only apply to countries the United States doesn't care for.
And really quickly, with the United States selling arms to Israel, as Israel is using some of those arms to exterminate the Palestinians, that's not only in violation of international law, it's in violation of American law. It's called the Arms Export Control Act. And so we are in violation of our own law.
And might I add this? Bombing Syria and Iraq was a violation of the Constitution and international law. But here's my thoughts. And even when we use this term rules-based order or we repeat it, it implies a formal set of rules. And here's the question, Tony Blinken, where can I find them? Where's a link I can click on and find the rules? Name one rule. Where can I look? It's like me saying, Pedro, you got to go by, Caleb, you have to, I was talking to my friend Pedro before the show and he's still in my mind. Caleb, you got to go by the rules. You're in violation of the rules. Do not violate in the rules. And Caleb says to me, Garland, what are the rules? That's not important now. What's important is that you don't violate. Caleb, where can I find a single rule on this quote, unquote, rules-based order?
Right. Well, they might direct you toward the UN Charter, but the USA is very much in violation of that with, saying all options are on the table and threatening the use of force all the time by having violated the territorial sovereignty of Syria and having U.S. troops in Syria, seizing Syria's oil. So they might point you toward the UN Charter. They might point you towards some, key international agreements like the Non-Proliferation Treaty or something. But at the end of the day, the enforcement of these rules is very, very selective, and that's pretty blatantly clear.
Switching gears to the United States leaving Afghanistan, but keeping the option of airstrikes open. The U.S. military will remain involved in the Afghanistan war into September, keeping the option of launching airstrikes against the Taliban to defend Afghan forces. U.S. officials said yesterday, even as the final combat troops prepare to leave the country. Sounds to me as though the United States is being sure that it maintains the rationale for ongoing involvement. And I will say this, we can expect this to stretch well past September. Caleb Maupin.
Indeed. And I mean, again, many people have noted that, there will still be the presence of U.S. intelligence on the ground. There will still be, collaboration between the Afghan government and the United States. And that, while yes, there will be a withdrawal of combat military personnel from Afghanistan, the United States is going to maintain a huge amount of influence in the country. It's not like the United States. This isn't Vietnam, where, when the United States pulled out of Vietnam, there's that very famous image of the helicopter, in the embassy. And this is not that situation at all. Afghanistan is still a country with a lot of rival factions competing for power. The Taliban, various Islamic fighting groups. You have some secular groups even. You have different forces on the ground. You have different forces aligned with different countries. You have the Jindallah terrorists that are trying to break away a section of Iran and are Sunni separatists that are going over the border into Iran and conducting terrorist attacks. You've got Uyghur separatists that are going over the border into China and trying to cause problems for China. You've got, a huge amount of heroin dealers. This is not a situation where, like the victory of the Vietnamese, where you have the socialist government is victorious. This is a country that's in chaos. And one of the factors in that chaos is the presence of U.S. troops. That factor is now going away, but the country is still in chaos. And the United States will still have a hand in quite a bit of that chaos, no doubt about it.
The other thing that we wanted to ask you about is China, and one of the things that is being compared now is the U.S.'s concerns over China passing them economically, militarily, et cetera. Over a few decades ago, it was Japan. When everything was made in Japan, it was like, oh no, the Japanese are going to pass us. It's this paranoia that comes along with empire that says, we've treated, to me, this is Garland speaking, we've treated everyone so bad when we had the power that we're horrified somebody else may get the power and they may do us like we did them. That's the way I read it. Your thoughts, Caleb?
Sure. And at this point, it's quite interesting because Donald Trump, was very much at odds with a lot of the U.S. establishment. And while they were screaming Russia, 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 he was saying China, China, China. And it seems like the Biden administration, while they criticized Trump for doing that, they've basically followed Donald Trump's lead. We had a summit between Biden and Putin that, Biden was not as hard and hostile as many expected him to be. Meanwhile, we have a situation where the USA is escalating against China. And as much as this was kind of condemned, it seems like, putting the focus on China was something the Trump administration did. And it's something that the Democrats are now doing. And this seems to be the new point of agreement among the U.S. foreign policy establishment is now that the focus is China. And you almost wonder if this is the way forward, if they're now moving ahead. There was that document published by the Atlantic Council that suggested the United States try to befriend Russia in the hopes of pulling Russia and China apart. And then other people in the Atlantic Council denounced it. But you have to wonder, is that plan in the works? And are they trying to, do the opposite of what was done during the Cold War and separate the two countries? But I'll tell you, it's going to be very, very hard to do because Russia and China are joined at the hip, not by ideology, but by economics. Russia sells oil and gas. China needs lots of oil and gas. So pulling them apart is not going to be easy.
And you add to that China saying that they're not going to stop supporting the Venezuelan people and rejecting foreign interference. In a ceremony at the Miraflores Palace in Caracas, the ambassador of the China ambassador to Venezuela assured that both countries will continue to support each other on fundamental issues. It will not change the principle of supporting the Venezuelan people in the search for the path of development with their own peculiarities, nor will it change the way of rejecting any form of foreign interference in international affairs of Venezuela. I found it interesting that ambassador said with their own peculiarities. That to me shows a sense of acceptance and a broader worldview that China has towards Venezuela, as opposed to the U.S. view, we'll help you out so long as you toe our line and do what we tell you to do.
Well, indeed. And it's interesting to point out, yesterday was the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. And President Xi Jinping gave a speech. And if you listen to that speech, it's very clear. I mean, the Chinese government is a Marxist-Leninist government. I mean, Marxist-Leninist ideology, Mao Zedong thought, Deng Xiaoping theory, the three representations, and now Xi Jinping thought. They believe in communism. And in Venezuela, they believe in Bolivarian socialism, which has elements of Marxism, elements of Christianity, elements of the indigenous traditions. But China has made clear it is not interested in exporting its system or imposing its system on the rest of the world. Their system is for China. Venezuela, their system is for Venezuela, and their ideology, Bolivarianism, is for South and Central America. And that while they have, Marxist worldviews, or views that are influenced by Marxism, I would say, but also influenced by other factors, they're not, this isn't the Communist International. This is not the 1920s and 30s where you had one global communist movement, having congresses in Moscow. This is a totally different situation. Whereas it's the United States that seems to argue that its economic model should be universally applied to all countries.
Caleb Maupin, as always, sir, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate that analysis, and we look forward to having you back.
Sure. Always a pleasure.
You're listening to The Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon. I'm joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon. There's more on the other side. Stay tuned.